Apartheid, of course, came with its own heroes and villains. It was a time of betrayal, resistance, anger, and for some, redemption. For a time, it seemed as though this would be the legacy South Africa would hold on to forever. All of South Africa's history led to this, and this is how South Africa would remain, were it not for the revolutionaries. The National Party came to power in 1924. After World War II, segregationist laws were expanded on and became instrumental in the way that South Africa operated. These laws were designed to limit the human rights of non-whites in South Africa and serve the ultimate goal of white dominance and the protection of white rule. Of course, this meant that white citizens were given many more opportunities. The rand was strong, infrastructure was well maintained, but only in white areas. All of this came at the cost of non-white areas being neglected, and the black population was controlled and moved around as the government saw fit. The movements that ended apartheid. There were many different movements and philosophies being passed around through the communities of the oppressed, but the following had the greatest impact, or were the most historically noteworthy. Early on in the resistance movement, until the 1960s, resistance was exclusively passive. This method of resistance changed as the government and its method of deterring resistance became more lethal. 69 peaceful protesters were shot in the Sharpeville massacre, a painful lesson that apartheid will not end peacefully. After World War II, in the 1950s, white veterans returned to South Africa from fighting the Nazis, only to find fascism growing in their home country. These veterans formed the Torch Commando, which rose to about 250,000 members, which made it the largest white protest the country had ever seen. This only lasted until 1952, as the government cracked down on organizations and movements that allegedly supported communism. Now, while this Torch Commando didn't really achieve as much as the other movements we see, it's notable because it also pushed the government into a position where they felt like they had to crack down, showing that they were holding onto their control with a tight grip since the beginning. Black consciousness was a promising new philosophy and movement in the 1960s, which promoted the idea of black citizens living and thriving separately from the white government. This movement aimed to use segregationist laws to their own benefit, as they would control their own society and only operate within their own community. This way of thinking led to students protesting in Soweto, which, of course, also ended in tragedy. By the 1990s, there had been extrajudicial killings, abductions, assassinations, imprisonments, and the obvious and overbearing oppression that had existed since segregationist laws began in the 1800s.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February, at about 3 p.m.
Apartheid finally came to an end due to the overwhelming international pressure, as well as a UN embargo, and the movements from within the country, and finally a change-up in the government, and of course, actual practical negotiations between the government and the resistance parties. This finally led to the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which served as a way for everyone to come to terms with what had happened and the crimes committed, and those who served the apartheid regime could open up about what they did and had the opportunity to apologize to those who were affected. The formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was supposed to be a jumping-off point for us all to close the book on apartheid, and was a hopeful note for us to leave that era of our history behind. The post-apartheid era. And so the new age of South Africa began. New challenges befall us all now. Our new post-apartheid government does not have the luxury of only supporting a percentage of South Africans, and yet the amount of money that there is for the benefit of the country seems to be constantly mismanaged, leading to many lawsuits. To this day, we are still stumbling through race issues, poor education, a weak currency, and gender-based violence issues among the worst in the world. Looking at our history, it is easy to understand where our issue with poverty comes from. Steps have been taken to gain equal opportunities in employment and education, yet in a time of COVID and an ever-shrinking middle class, the population seems dissatisfied, setting the stage for the recent riots. And this is where we are today, a country that bears the scars of its past on its sleeve, a country that calls itself the Rainbow Nation despite all of these issues that are still somehow prevalent today. But honestly, that moniker, the Rainbow Nation, still feels earned because we have come a long way. Because if we look at what happened with these riots these past few days, or maybe even weeks for some people, people from all different walks of life banded together. The riots never devolved into blacks versus whites or anything like that. It was just chaos versus order. It was people trying to protect their own. It was people standing up for not just families, but whole communities. And that's why I think it's important to know our history. It's important to be shocked by our past, because the more shocked we are, the more disappointed we are in what came before us, the better that speaks about ourselves, because it all means that we've grown and that we have made a difference, even if it's just the small difference of acting more civilized with one another than the people who came before us. So well done, South Africa, and keep growing.